This is Back to Back.
Yo, what's up, back-to-backers? This is Willy Joy. Welcome to the show. This is Back to Back. This is my podcast. How is everybody out there today? Depending on where you are, maybe you're buried in snow. Maybe your house is floating away in a flood. I don't know. It's feeling weird all over the country right now. I feel crazy. I am about to move across the country, and then I'm about to basically move right back. Your boy is about to become a little bi-coastal. You're going to see me popping around the East Coast a little more. And actually, weirdly enough, I think I'm going to be spending more time in LA too. We'll see how this all works out, but man, I'm going to be glad when this move is done. But regardless of what is happening in my own stupid life, this podcast rolls on. The machine does not stop. And this episode, man, this is an important episode. I have Kevin Saunderson on the show, the techno legend himself, one of the originators of techno music, which really means one of the originators of dance music, period. There's very few people where you can say literally a genre of music would not exist without them, but Kevin Saunderson is one of them. So it was an honor to have him on the show, a true legend. He's got a new track out right now called Spicy Mug, and he's reunited his legendary group Inner City, and they are going on tour this summer. Some of the dates are already up. They're going to release some more soon, and I'm going to link in the description of this episode where you can find all the music, all the tour dates, and go see a legend. I'm going to get into that chat with Kevin in just a minute. Before I do, I just want to make sure everyone's subscribed to the show. If you're a new listener, nice to meet you. Go ahead and just click that little subscribe button, click the follow button, wherever you're listening on. That way, every single week, a brand new episode is going to get delivered straight from me to you. You don't have to do anything. I'll just show up with a smile or, like a sexy, sultry look, whatever look you want. I don't really care. It's fine. And I will hand deliver a brand new episode to you every single week. You can also hit me up. Email me at backtobackpod@gmail.com, or you can hit me on social media at WillyJoy or at backtobackpod. And, send me whatever you want. You can send me your music if you make music. You can send me your thoughts about the show. You can, call out your favorite artist, tell them they should be a guest on this show. Or you can just, let me know what's going on with your life. I'm down to chat. I love meeting everybody who listens to this show. So make sure to hit me up. And as long as you're calling out your favorite artists, why not let people know that you're enjoying this show? I get asked a lot, what is the best way to support this show? What's the best way to support me and help this whole thing grow? And the answer to that is really word of mouth. Tell a friend about this show, make a post if you're listening, let people know you're enjoying it, retweet something that I put up. All of that is free, and it really helps this show grow so much. So shout out to everybody supporting the show. It always means a lot, and I'm really psyched to bring this week's episode to you guys. So, Kevin Saunderson, this is not somebody I ever expected to talk to. The word legend gets tossed around a lot. There's very few people who actually deserve it. Kevin Saunderson is an actual legend. Along with Derrick May and Juan Atkins, they're known as the Belleville Three. Back in Detroit in the early 80s, they literally invented techno music. And yes, of course, there were influences. There were people who came before them, but they put the stamp on it. No one had ever done it like this, and they literally changed the course of dance music history. Kevin Saunderson has so many groundbreaking achievements, it was mind-boggling to even talk to him. You can hear me. At a certain point, I just didn't even know what to do anymore. It was overwhelming. Not only did he, along with the Belleville Three, pretty much invent techno music, Kevin Saunderson more or less pioneered the modern concept of what a remix is. And if that wasn't enough, Kevin Saunderson also created the Reese bass, invented it. And if you don't know, that is a sound that is so common in dance music, especially in drum and bass. I mean, if that sound didn't exist, literally thousands of songs would have never been made. There was so much to get into. He's had such a long, incredible career. He also founded the group Inner City, which had some of the most classic dance songs of all time. Big Fun, Good Life. You know, he was topping the Billboard charts in the 80s. It's crazy to think about. So look, I'm going to stop babbling. I could go on and on about all the crazy shit that Kevin Saunderson has done, but I'm just going to let you hear it from his own mouth. So let's get into it right now. This is me and Kevin Saunderson back to back. Let's go. So we're out here in Los Angeles, and I can only imagine how many times you've come out here at this point. Do you remember the first time you came out to LA for music?
Vaguely. I mean, I was coming out to LA probably back in 1989, maybe even 88, as I was having some success with my group, Inner City. So we was coming out here doing like these shows and performances. So I remember that vaguely. I also remember coming earlier in that time and meeting Doc Martin and he was kind of doing some stuff. I don't know if I actually played at that time, but just
being in the scene.
Right, like going to the record shops. So.
What were your impressions of LA and just of the West Coast at that time? Because, you know, these days, I think it's pretty easy to think of LA as kind of the heart of dance music in the U.S. But back then, I mean, it was all flipped around a little bit, right?
Yeah, I think it was still new when people were trying to kind of follow what was going on more or less in the UK, I think. And but it was developing in a way and fresh, but also it still had a long way to go, I think, at that time.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. And I mean, it's interesting. You were born in New York, is that right?
Yeah. I was born in Brooklyn, New York. Mm-hmm.
And how long did you live there before you moved out to the Midwest?
I would think maybe 9, 10-ish.
Okay.
You know, somewhere right around there.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're, 8, 9, 10 years old, I have to imagine you got a little bit of the flavor of New York City before leaving there. Because, movies and TV shows have been made about New York during that period. Mm-hmm. In your experience, was it, that grit, that excitement, all of that kind of all happening there?
Yeah, I think so. When I watched the Get Down, and it just reminded me of back when I was young.
Yeah, I saw that show too.
It definitely reminded me back then of it was very similar to that. Streets were dirty, it was gritty, it was dangerous, but you still did your thing, you still hung out.
What part of the city were you living?
I was in Brooklyn and Flatbush.
Okay.
So New York's like paradise now compared
yeah, I was
to
gonna
then.
Say,
I can
bet
say
you
that
don't
much.
recognize it anymore. I can't even imagine back then. It must have looked so different. And were you involved, or not even involved, but just was there sort of music in your home at the time? Were you a musical child? Or what was going on around you musically in the city?
Well, I think at that age, I wasn't really attached to music yet. Besides, whatever my mother listened to, I listened to it. My mother actually was from Detroit, so she was Motown most of the time.
Okay.
Get in the car, she was playing a lot of that type of stuff.
So the move to Detroit or to outside of Detroit, how did that come about? Was it for work, for your parents?
Well, my mother just decided she wanted to move back home. She had another child, which was my sister at the time. And I think she felt like New York wasn't as safe. My father had a couple run-ins with a couple people at that time, like getting robbed, stuff like that.
Wow. Just in the neighborhood.
And yeah, so, she just felt like she wanted to get back home. And that's, she packed up her bags and decided to move back to where she was from.
Sure. And where you ended up was Belleville, right?
Well, first actually it was Inkster.
Okay.
Because I did go to like elementary a year or two, and then from there I moved to Belleville.
Okay. And is Inkster just another suburb?
That's another suburb of Detroit, closer to Detroit than Belleville was, kind of in between both. And that's where my mother was raised most of her life.
Oh, okay. That must have been kind of a culture shock for you at the time, right? Going from vibrant New York to sort of more just rural Michigan.
Yeah. Well, I had an opportunity to go probably to Inkster once a year. My mother would go back, so at least I knew the area at that time. So it was different for sure compared to Brooklyn. But Belleville was even more different than both.
Okay.
So that was more of the culture shock than Inkster.
Was it just smaller, more remote?
It was definitely smaller. It had lots of lakes. And as far as the people, it was probably 99% white. Very little blacks in the town, and probably no other race that I can ever remember at that time.
Right. I mean, yeah, that doesn't surprise me. That's sort of exactly what I would think of rural Michigan being, especially in that era. And so, at that time for you, if music wasn't a big thing for you yet, what were you doing at the time? Like, what took up a lot of your interest?
Well, as I just hung out really with people and played games in the street like football, baseball, basketball. Just went to school and hung out with the neighborhood kids in Inkster. And once I moved to Belleville, it was quite different because there was no neighborhood kids for me to hang out, or I didn't know anyone until I moved to. Well, not until I moved. Till I started going to junior high school. That's where I first met Juan Atkins and Derrick May, and I still was more geared towards sports, and I had hobbies. I started having hobbies like fishing, and it was different. It was totally different. But sports became a big part of my life before music. I was heavily into playing sports.
And this is late 70s, early 80s, around there?
This was, I would say there, because I graduated high school in 82, so I would say, 78, 79. I went to junior high, then I went on to high school in 80.
Okay, gotcha. And you mentioned, of course, Juan Atkins, Derrick May. Do you remember meeting them the first time?
Yeah, pretty much so. I met Derrick on the football team at practice. He was fast. He had all this energy. He was very hyper. So I remember him very well. We actually had a mutual friend, too, that was on the football field, which was Juan's brother. His name was Aaron. So, and that's how I became to meet Juan. Juan, even though he went to the school, he was 2 years older. So he was like in 7th grade. Juan was in 9th. He didn't have time for no 7th graders. Because we knew his brother, and we started to become friends, we started going to the house. So I met Juan at the house. He's very mysterious, very quiet type of guy. Didn't really talk. Kind of was his own world. And so you just, just say what's up and keep on doing your thing.
And was he the first of you three to kind of really focus in on music like that?
Yeah, I would say no doubt. I think even at that time, there was some first generation synthesizers and stuff in the house, multiple tape decks.
So he already had some of that.
Yeah, like very early generations of stuff. But he had aspirations of being a musician, and I think the tools that were out made him want to become an electronic musician.
Was there much of a blueprint for what that could look like at the time? Because, all this technology is new. I mean, we're talking about, some of the first sequencers, right? Some of the first, major synthesizers that are now talked about as these kind of legendary things. At that time, I mean, what could you even look to conceptualize that you could be an electronic musician?
Yeah, I mean, my blueprint became Juan, became craft work. As I got older, at that time, I didn't even know my path was going to be music. But so I think the foundation was being laid as far as being able to use these electronic instruments to make music. But for me, I had no clue even how they worked,
right?
How the process. I just seen them as machines. I had no clue at that time until later, of course, some years later, after hearing Juan actually put out actual records that were being played on radio that sounded so different in comparison to Motown or any disco, because I was listening to some disco at that time. Now, as time went on, or just any regular, I guess, pop music or any music you heard on radio at that time.
How did you get that support, either you or Juan or whoever, that early support for something that sounded so different, right? And that maybe didn't fit in with a regular radio format. Was there, a person or a station that really supported it early on?
There was a guy named Electrifying Mojo. He's from Detroit. He had this radio show. I first heard him when I was in, I think, maybe 10th grade. And Derrick May, he was the one who upped me up on Mojo. I didn't even know he had this show. Come on at 12 midnight. I'm in bed trying to get ready for school. But Derrick moved in with me for like a half a semester, the second half of 10th grade, because his mother decided to move back to Detroit. And that's how I found out about Mojo. And Mojo played this collage of music and albums of artists and introduced Detroit and suburban Detroit, as long as the airways would go, to Kraftwerk, B-52s, Parliament Funkadelic, Prince, and then at some point, Cybertron, which was Juan's project at the time, or during those times.
Sure. Was he Cybertron before he was putting out music as Juan Atkins?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Cybertron was his first attempt or his first project that I know of.
It's pretty good for a first try, man.
Oh, yeah. And he worked with, I think, another guy called Rick, who was very into the future. So they made a great chemistry in the early part of,
Well, and it's interesting you say he was into the future. Was that really some of the thinking back then? Was that, actually this is sort of like sci-fi become reality, right? These new technologies.
Yeah, and I think he read a book. Alvin Toffler, I believe is his name. I never read the book. I think I had seen some YouTube things on it and stuff like that. But, it talked about the third wave. And so he very much was into what he was talking about in the book. And that had a big influence on technology. And he based Juan become forward-thinking with music, where most people just wanted to be able to play a drum like a drummer, or play the bass as good as the best bass player you knew, or the guitar like Prince, or whatever. You know what I mean? So,
well, yeah, because what were even DJs doing at that time, right? Because, I mean, the DJ back then is not the same thing as a DJ now.
No. The DJ at the time, well, I wasn't even seeing DJs. The first DJ I might have seen was Juan. So he already was different because he played music that I didn't hear before. Some of the same music that Mojo played when I first started hearing music. But then as I started going back to New York, I started hearing people like Larry Levan, like in maybe 82, maybe 81, but 82 for sure. I don't know if it was 83 or somewhere after high school. Because I would go back and visit for some summers. I just don't remember the first year I heard Larry at the Paradise Garage in New York. So,
legendary.
Right. So that's when I really got an impression of a DJ. And even as he played, it became even different as we kind of started DJing and as time went on. But I mean, like Larry would play basically disco and just play these extended versions that you heard on the radio, just longer, like 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 40 minutes of Chic, the same record.
Right, just, looping the breaks or,
Keep starting and be getting over it.
And at the time, I mean, that's revolutionary, right?
Oh, definitely.
I have to imagine people were just losing their minds.
Because the normal public didn't know about this. And the normal DJ probably just played the record from the beginning to the end, just like on the radio, and let it just kind of go in.
No mixing.
Right.
So to
it
speak
wasn't the mixing and all that, was first generation from probably Larry and people who were around also at that time.
And so how did you start DJing? How did that come about?
Well, so like after high school, 1982, I went to Eastern Michigan University. I went to college. I was playing football up there. So at that time, I had musical. I was more into music then, but I wasn't on path to make music.
Sure.
But not shortly afterwards, it changed quite quickly. So as I'm listening to Mojo and hearing Juan make music, going back to New York, I'm hearing more disco. My ear is kind of with the four on the floor. I'm hearing Kraftwerk, which is future music, technology, synthetic music being made. Not necessarily really dance music, but just like, a band, but not a band.
Yeah, I mean, it was new and fresh, right? And felt like the future.
Exactly. So Derrick and myself kept in contact because Derrick at the time moved to Chicago. Juan, we really never really kept in contact. If I seen him, we would just say hi.
Yeah.
So Juan was doing his thing, but at the same time, he's making music. And you would hear his records on the radio, which I was like, I know that guy. I went to school with him, And I was playing sports. So one day my path changed in sports. The coach that recruited me got fired. And basically the new coach really didn't seem that interested in a lot of the people that were still at the school. So he's bringing his own kind of recruitment class in, and you got to feel like you weren't really needed or wanted there. So I was in school studying telecommunications, TV, radio, broadcasting. So I was, working cameras and learning the different parts of filmmaking and kind of stuff like that.
Is that what you thought might be?
Right. That was
path?
my early inspirations. I was even a radio DJ on the campus.
Oh, okay.
So that was really my first DJing role. I was still like any other typical radio DJ. I play a record and let it roll out and try to, we didn't have no tools for you to mix at the radio at then, but I try to keep it going as the best I could. So that kind of was the first step. Then by keeping in contact with Derrick, who was living in Chicago, as time developed, like through 82, going into 83, I think Derrick, he was telling me about Chicago and Frankie Knuckles At the same time, the Chicago house movement was parallel really to Detroit, very close. I mean, you're talking about months apart. Who knows which side started first?
Yeah.
For me, Juan, because I was there and, I knew Juan. I didn't know there was no house music at the time.
Yeah, you saw it very early.
Right. So the Chicago movement was going as Derrick was living there, and Derrick would come back every now and then to see Juan and take his records and try to give it to people there and stuff like that. So basically, Derrick moved back to Detroit, and I heard this DJ on the radio. It was just playing Chicago Time to Jack and some early Juan, some Cybertron stuff, and he was mixing kind of bizarre with effects and kind of wow. Well, they didn't say who he was. Just had this guy on. I come to find out it was Derrick. So he moved back to Detroit, got this radio show in Detroit, was playing this music. And somehow we got in contact. I found out. We hung out. That was my kind of about the next phase for me that really brought me into the movement at the time, because it was only Juan and it was Derrick and it was a few other cats that was around.
Yeah, well, that's maybe a really interesting point, because I think it's easy to talk about, Detroit techno and Chicago house as these, bustling movements, but I have to imagine that at the start, it must have felt very underground, right? And that, you were kind of onto something secret that a lot of other people didn't know about yet.
Yeah, I mean, it was almost like the best kept secret, or nobody else really gets what's about to happen, or the possibilities of what you can do with this technology. Because, you still had musicians who were like, oh, man, I play. I'm, trying to be proud of,
yeah, of course,
their art, which is fine. But this was a different way. So as I'm around Derrick more, I'm meeting a few people that's on the same wavelength. And by me playing sports, it made me very competitive. So when I could see something, and I said, like, I want to be a DJ. I want to be able to mix. I started thinking about Larry Levan. I started remember when I first seen Juan mix, and I see Derrick mixing now. So I'm thinking, well, I want to mix. I want to learn how to put records together. So kind of at that time, I went out and, actually Derrick introduced me to some friends of his that lived at Eastern Michigan University. I actually seen them DJ a party up at Eastern. You just get these parties, fraternity parties. They were forward-thinking, playing and mixing European disco, Italian disco, Juan stuff, whatever, Prince.
Yeah.
They had these special edits. So I got to know them. Their name was Art Payne and Keith Martin. And their door was open. Derrick told them, hey, man, Kevin, I went to high school with Kevin partially, and I know him for a while. This, he kind of invite me in. So football kind of was over. So that door opened up. I decided to just leave football, and this music just became my life. So leaving football was like easy. As much as I thought like that was my path too. I left that in a second, and I started practicing as much as I could in that place and listening to records and just being very observant. So I was kind of the guy. It was several guys that were DJs that I met that started playing before me, but that were my age or maybe a year older, between Derrick and Juan, that I met through Derrick. So I was like the guy on the outside still to them. Because Derrick knew them all and Juan, they knew Juan. Yeah. And so they didn't know who I am. They're like, who this big guy you bringing in here, So.
And you had to kind of prove yourself a little bit.
Right. But, little did they know, my work ethic's second to none. So, and that's how I escalated myself into becoming good or better in a short period of time. And also, Derrick had this radio show. It was just him, but then I guess he was talking to the people there, and it became a show just like Chicago. Like we had our own show. I think it was called Street Beat. Or he had his own show, and he needed 5 or 6 DJs. He was trying to duplicate the Hot Mix 5 or Super Mix 6, and have
Chicago,
5, 6 DJs on from 10 o'clock at night to 4 in the morning. So Derrick let me do my mix, which was, challenging because I had to step up my game real quick.
Yeah.
That was really my first phase into the music side through late 82 going into 83.
Okay.
And it went from there into making music or learning about these synthesizers and drum machines.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that a lot, but I just have a question about, while you were talking, I was thinking about the culture of the time. And, you're talking about these innovative DJs at these parties playing music from Europe and playing things that people hadn't heard before, even some of Juan Atkins' own stuff. I mean, what were parties like before that? What was everybody else listening to at a party at that time?
So I think the first parties I went to really was, like I say, when Juan was playing. And he did that actually at my house. It was like my senior graduation. And he played this electric music that nobody heard from my high school, and some of it you heard from the Mojo. So that was really the first party, okay? Then you had Larry Levan, which was on a whole different way, because it was really, the culture there was really mainly 90% gay men and women, which embraced disco and this unique music that was coming from.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of became this collecting point, right? And this safe space, for lack of a better word, right?
Right.
Where they could all just be a community together, not deal with the rest of society.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And by me going there and experience that, I seen the love for the music and the way they danced. It was very inspirational, for one, because it was just, you didn't see anything like that.
And the way music can bring people together, right?
Right. It definitely did that. So college was different because it was college kids. So basically, the parties that I started going to was like some of these guys that I was telling you about were playing these fraternity parties. That was really the only parties that was happening, because I wasn't hanging out in Detroit or going to any parties in the city at that point. It was just on campus.
Yeah.
Or I might go to the Michigan State University, or I might go to U of M to a icebreaker or whatever. But it still was, it was the beginning of mixing. You heard music that was mixed. You heard some of the same music, disco and Planet Rock, that kind of stuff, Hugh Masekela, and the crowd was all black. It was all black.
I was going to ask, right, because my impression of colleges is that at that time, where even the ones that were integrated were still segregated, right?
Definitely, because I went to Eastern Michigan. Now, there might have been, 2% blacks, 3%, I don't know how many, but definitely was integrated where we all kind of supported, whatever, socially and all that was kind of together, okay? So that was the party scene, and you could maybe walk by some fraternity houses, some of the ones that just the standard, just the white fraternities, and you could hear the music, but it wasn't dance music. It was like rock and roll, punk rock. It was really about social and drinking beer, where our parties was more about the music. So I couldn't wait once I became a DJ to do my first fraternity kind of party on campus. So that was the kind of the culture at the time. It really was just black fraternities, or it was either 90% gay, depending on what part of if he was in New York or if he was in wherever.
And would white people come to the black fraternity parties, or was it really? Yeah.
No, it really was all black. That changed as time went on. It became, as like, changed. I'm going a little bit ahead, but it changed when the Music Institute, at least in Detroit, opened up, and you started seeing more of a mixture. I mean, people like Richie Houghton was coming over as a kid from Windsor to go to this club that me, Derrick, a guy named D. Wynn, that was our Paradise Garage or Music Box in Detroit. That really didn't change until to that point, which was probably right around 87, 88.
So it's kind of the artists who made it happen a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. Because, we got to experience things in Chicago and go to New York, Let's go back to New York all the time. And as we started making music, we would go because we give them to the DJs that we did know. Like, or give them to somebody who could get them to whoever.
And so when you did start producing your own music, was it pretty quickly that Inner City formed, or were you working for a while before that group came together?
Well, I started messing around with drum machines and sequences, I would say, by somewhere in 84, maybe late 83. Got real serious in 84.
That same competitive spirit.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But I think my first record came out, or at least on my label, KMS, 87 was my first record. The reason I say that because I released my first record called Cream, Triangle of Love. It came out on Juan's label first. I'm just not clear if, and I got to go back and look at this, if Juan put it out in 86 and then I put it out in 87, because I told him at one point I watched what Juan was doing again. I kind of observed and I decided that I can do that.
Right.
I can give a DJ my record. Because, I didn't see a lot going on. I could put a label and, give it to whoever. So I told him I want my record back. He gave it back to me. I re-released it. Definitely in 87.
Did you have to more or less make your own label at that point to be able to get it out? Like, I have to imagine there just weren't that many outlets.
Yeah, well, my only outlet that I really knew was going to be Juan.
Right.
So even though that there were other record companies, I didn't know much about the industry at the time. I didn't know what, this music was so new. Even it took Virgin a while to decide if they was going to sign Big Pun from Inner City,
Which is crazy to think about now.
Right. Yeah. It's because it was just on fire, and it just, through time, that's how it ended up happening. But
which is the way I think a lot of those projects end up happening is
exactly
the label doesn't buy into it until the public does.
Exactly. They see it like, hey, we missing the boat. We better jump on this.
Yeah.
So there wasn't many outlets. So, if you think about it, we kind of developed what Berry Gordy kind of did, at least in our mind. That's what we thought we were doing. By controlling our own labels. Berry made multiple labels as well, but he had, multiple artists. But, I started putting out people like Blake Baxter, James Pennington, whatever. Juan had his label. He put out Eddie Folk's first record. He put out Derrick's first record. Then Derrick came up with his own label, started Rhythm is Rhythm. He started putting out a few other people from Detroit, The only difference is Berry did his because they were having so much success on radio. So radio didn't want record companies monopolizing one label, so you could only play so much of one label.
Oh, that's interesting.
So Berry created aliases or multiple labels so they wouldn't have that issue, right? So we did it to really give our labels spark and not just put out our own music, but be able to help some other Detroit people at the time. So at the first, for me, to start it was so I had control and I could learn what I'm doing as I'm putting out my own music, and I could say I want it out in 3 weeks or I want it out in 2 months.
Right.
I would have to wait. I wouldn't have to ask nobody what's going on. It would all fall on my shoulders, which was kind of nice because, you know, it inspired you to hurry up and make a new record.
Sure, yeah. And I mean, if you're the kind of person, and it seems like you are, who really likes to kind of get your hands dirty, dive into everything, become the best at, you know, all the facets of it, that only makes sense, not to mention the fact that probably a lot of labels didn't know what to do with what you were making at the time, right?
Exactly. It just would have sat on the shelf. And and then, you know, you don't know if you would have got paid, anything. All kind of stuff was going on back in those days. So,
I mean, how did interest in you and in your music start to grow? Was it, I mean, obviously Inner City with Big Fun and with, you know, Good Life. I mean, those are international smash hits.
Yeah.
But were there any points before that where you thought, oh, hey, you know, people really seem to be picking up on this. I must be doing something right.
Oh, yeah. I mean, really, my first record was satisfying enough. I mean, I heard Tony Humphries play it on the radio. I was in New York trying to tell my brothers of them, yeah, I got my first record out. And it's like, I don't know, 12:30 in the morning, and we just sit up talking. All of a sudden, I hear my record come in. Tony Humphries is playing it. That was very motivating and exciting just to hear him playing the record. And then when I would drive to Chicago, I would hear the Chicago DJs play it. They wouldn't play it for long, but they really liked how it did the snare rolls and it built up in one section of the song. So it was almost like they did an edit. We used 2 records and play it. They wouldn't play it fully out. So that gave me inspiration to go back in and make another record. So I think the next record, well, I did actually, was like an EP back then. I did a track with Derrick. I did 2 tracks with James Pennington, and then I released it as an EP. That did fairly okay especially with the Chicago DJs. So you're just learning with the technology, you're getting better at it, you understanding the equipment more. Then my biggest record before Big Fun became the sound and how to play our music, Reese in San Antonio. So I did this track and with another guy, and it just was huge on the underground scene because everybody in New York played the one track I did called The Sound, and everybody in Chicago played the other, how to play our music. It's called You Can't Tell Us How to Play Our Music.
Oh, okay.
It was, you know, it was like a message too at the time. Like, we're making this music, we own something else, and nobody's gonna tell us different.
Cry,
right?
Yeah.
And it just kept going. I was making music pretty quick. Then became Bounce Your Body to the Box. That was, you know, because you drive back to Chicago, you go to Chicago, you hear it on the radio. You can't be inspired more. And then you got local DJs starting to play it and stuff like that too. So my music was being played. I'm developing as time, but I'm learning as a label. I'm selling more records, you know.
Were you getting booked to DJ at that point? Like, was that I have to imagine that wasn't happening as much for anybody back then.
Oh, I was only doing my own fraternity parties,
okay,
which was still beneficial and helpful. I saw that didn't come until getting booked as a DJ came probably after somewhere in 88, late 87.
And it's interesting to me to think about, I mean, the music at the time and then getting into the Inner City project. I think there's this perception that Detroit techno is, you know, it's robotic, it's mechanical, it's all that. But to me, I always felt like that wasn't exactly it. Like, I always felt like it was really soulful and kind of funky in its own way.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And for you, I'm just curious, especially with Inner City, which was a much more pop-leaning project. Was that always in your head that you kind of wanted to kind of broaden the appeal of what you were doing and kind of marry those influences?
Well, here's what I think. I think the music that we made, Juan made, the Detroit guys made, definitely had some swing to it. It had definitely some funk.
Yeah.
It was just done in our own manner. Now, people say that mystique about the music being robotic it's really because the music became so diffused from other influences coming back making music. And by the time people hear, they might have heard a record from Germany or a record from London.
Right.
And didn't really, and they don't even think of black people making this music for one. I mean, that's the reality.
No, absolutely.
So as we pioneered this sound, our sound was definitely that way. It was funky. It could be instrumental. Like Derrick would mainly make instrumental music. Juan would he put vocal chants and stuff like that in some of his synthesizer, but it still had a rhythm, it still had a swing, it had a groove, it was funky. So inner city, because I used to go to the Paradise Garage, I used to hear Shaka Khan, Stephanie Mills, Evelyn Champagne King. So guess what? I'm hearing records being played by Larry Levan. It's got all this space and intros and gaps, but it's got vocals, and it made you want to sing. It's got great melodies. So my inspiration for Inner City was to make uplifting music. That was really what it was about. I didn't think about making it a pop group. I think what kind of helped that crossover appeal was the singer. She had a voice too. So it was a great combination. Because it was uplifting music, but as well, the songs were very uplifting. And it was so uniquely different. And then it was connected to the house techno world, the same equipment that was made by both. Were married, it was all married as one electronic, sound. And, people threw me into techno, people threw me in the house. But I was just making a track with the technology that I could make at the time.
Well, and I mean, inner city in certain places, I feel like, especially overseas, I mean, you guys were almost pop, right?
Oh, yeah.
Treated as pop stars?
Oh, yeah. We was doing shows like Top of the Pops. I did shows with Diana Ross. I did shows with Shaka Khan. I did shows with people I was like, well, they're pop stars. Why are we doing this show? But
do you remember those? I mean, how did they look at what you were doing? Did you talk to them about it at the time?
Not too much. I was kind of to myself, and I didn't really get into all that, and I wasn't, I just it was just bizarre that I was doing these shows with people who that I never imagined I would be next to. But we were hot, and we were having all this success, and people were buying our records, and radio was playing it, and that's got to be the first time you're on the road a lot too, right? Oh yeah, touring and doing all these shows. But it was definitely different. It wasn't something that part I didn't plan. It just kind of evolved. It kind of happened, and I kind of went with the flow.
Did you like that part of it? I mean, obviously you like the success, but the touring, that lifestyle, getting recognized, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I never wanted to be signing autographs and doing pop shows. At one point at the beginning, I was like, well, let the singer go out. I don't want to go, but because, I signed this contract in the city, it was both of us, and they wanted to market the group as this group. So I just kind of went with the flow at the time. It wasn't, where my singer probably was, sometime when you're a singer or a certain performer, like Prince or whoever, they have people, we all have people we're inspired by and want to be like. But I wasn't the kind of guy that said, I want to be on the front of the stage. I want to be in the background making the music and pushing the buttons.
Yeah.
That was always my vision, which I was, but I had to kind of wear both hats.
Yeah, right. And I mean, it's interesting to think about now in 2019. I mean, the DJ is the front man, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And the DJ is the rock star.
Definitely.
Is that strange for you at this point, or have you kind of made your peace with it?
Well, that's it's funny because that part I didn't mind. When I DJ'd, I wanted to be. That was how I wanted to perform, but not as the artist of creating this track being here. Because at that time, think about it, I was a studio musician. So when you're a studio musician, you make these tracks or make parts, you put them together through sequences, computers, through your creative vibes. But I wasn't a singer, so I wasn't like I was performing. So I didn't really have a role when I got on stage.
Yeah, I can see that.
At that time, because, technology wasn't good enough to take your studio around the world.
Sure, and I'm sure that people watching the show, it's still new technology, so they don't necessarily even know what you're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. People today sometimes don't know what you're doing. I was doing a live show, E-Dance Live recently, and they was like, well, what is he DJing? What is he using? Like, no, that's Ableton Live, and that's this. People trying to explain. I'm like, oh, boy.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny how it's all cyclical, right? Because I remember, I first started going to raves and to parties in the late 90s.
Yeah.
And it was a lot about the live PAs back then.
Right.
And that was a big deal. And then for a long time, it was just about DJing, and the live thing went away. And now I think we're starting to see the live thing come back again.
Yeah, funny you say that because I'm doing actually a tour. See, technology's changed compared to when I did my first tour. I did a tour in 1989. So imagine what I did is this is for inner city because we had all the success. So I was a singer. That's easy because she can sing background singers. I had a bass player who could play bass, guitar. I had a drummer, but it wasn't the same because I never felt like he could hit the 4/4 like an electronic rhythm.
Right.
So I always felt like this is dragging, like,
Yeah, it's too human almost.
It was right. So that was kind of my first tour. Then it involved my next tour. Technology started changing a little. You can have octapads and play some of the same sounds. You sample like some of these same sounds you use in the record and replay them on stage humanly. So at least you are playing the same sound.
Right.
And now, I mean, through over the time, like when I toured, I did an inner city show, 30-year anniversary show at Movement back in Detroit this past May. And, so now I bring the studio on stage in a combination with musicians. So it's just, it shows you how things
kind of a full circle.
It's changing.
Yeah.
And now, we're going to Europe to do maybe like 20 or 30 shows this coming up summer. So,
that's great.
Things, live is coming back, a combination of both. And sometimes I think it's needed to not just be stuck on the DJ,
right?
Because there are artists behind the music. Because otherwise, people forget that there's true artists out here that are making this music and people that can sing that very much love house, techno, or somewhere in between.
Absolutely. And I think in this era, especially in the States, right, the last 5-10 years, there was this explosion of new interest in electronic music. And it was very DJ focused, but I think even from an audience perspective, people are starting to want more, to want to see something evolve. Because, you can have the biggest LED wall in the world, but I think once you go to a few festivals and see that happen over and over, people are ready for something new. You know? It's interesting you mentioned Movement Festival, which for a minute, I mean, you were there at the start of Movement Festival in Detroit, right?
Yeah, I seen the first one. I actually was a part of creating the idea for the first one. I just wasn't the person doing it.
But you did eventually. You were in charge of it for a few years, right?
Yeah, I was in charge of it in 2005, and I came in 2004 because it was a free festival, and Derrick May was trying to do it, and he had some issues. So I brought some money in, a little bit of my knowledge. I kind of was in it only for the last month and a half, so I didn't really, it was a big wake-up call. But then I did it in 2005. I'm the one who took it to the city council and got them to vote on letting us make it a chargeable festival. That was the first time that it was done at that place in Detroit, Hart Plaza. And, I decided to step back out. Paxa House, who runs it now, at the time was running the stage for me. And then they've kept it going. So my role now is I do my own showcase stage every Sunday, every year, and I curate the lineup. So I'm still a part in that capacity.
Sure. And I mean, movement, I've been to movement several times, and I think it's one of the most incredible festivals in the country.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons, but I think it celebrates its roots, right?
Yeah.
In a way that, most other festivals, even you take, the Coachellas of the world, all that,
Right.
which are great events,
Yeah.
but they're very much about, just what's hot that second,
Yeah.
Whereas what I love about movement is that it does have, all the new sounds, all the fresh stuff, but it also looks back. It looks
Yeah.
at the roots. It celebrates where it came from.
Yeah, it doesn't forget the history. It's always definitely puts artists on from the past, and even my philosophy on my stage, past, present, and the future.
And I mean, I think you see the crowds react so well to that. And it's, I think, even more important now because, at least in my opinion, I think in the United States, dance music has a very short memory. And I mean, you were even talking about earlier, you would see some of this music that you started, techno music, go over to Europe and be kind of changed around by their culture and their interpretation and come back here without even really knowing where it started, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And I mean, how do you, I'm sure you've dealt with this at certain points. Like, it's a weird thing to me when you want this music to succeed, right? You want it to blow up. The bigger it gets, I think, the better it is for everybody in this industry. But in that process, so many times the originators can get left behind or forgotten. And I'm curious for you, who's still, after all this time, I mean, you're still super active, putting out music. What has your experience been with that? Like, do you see, new fans coming along every so often? Does that cycle for you? And how do you think about kind of your legacy and how it affects your music now?
Yeah, I think that there's been some periods where you get a little annoyed or frustrated because people don't necessarily know the history, and it's not necessarily the people's fault. It's more or less the promoters, the media, the magazines, through time, who is not telling the story right or just don't care. So then that's what makes it difficult, because we know, like, if people hear it, if they know, if they're aware, then it'll have more relevance, which has helped social media over time. I think that's why electronic music has become more acceptable to the generations now and the generations of the past, and it's kind of become one, even though the genres, they are more split now. But I think it's better now than it was, years ago, going way back even to the beginning. There was a time in the beginning where, it was just the people who really knew, but they were really supportive, and they came out, and that was great. But then it came a void where, like you say, everything was coming back from Europe or somewhere else in the world, and all these artists were coming over here playing, but there was no history really attached. Besides, people could only think that this is this techno music that started in Europe,
Right.
which was not the case. So, I've been able to keep myself around because I love what I do. I was meant to do this. I know that. It's kind of like, Detroit. We don't, if you think about it, Derrick, Juan Atkins, Carl Craig, Stacy Pullen, many of us are still out there touring the world and still putting out music.
Sure. And
doing very well at it, but it's so you always re-educating, and I always get people that's some age, I get called an OG a lot more than I used to, but then, you see comments or hear people say, man, he's OG and he's bad, or he's doing this, you hear them trying to talk about the history, which is good. And, like I say, social media, you can market and they can push us differently now when, there's a party or there's a project or something special. There's been a few documentaries.
Right.
I'm sure there's going to be more documentaries. They just did that thing on the BBC. I'm not sure if you know about that special that
I don't know if
house
I do.
music's quite amazing, quite in depth, done very well. Talk about the history of house and Detroit.
I gotta check that
and
out.
the roles we played in the beginning, and it really lays it out in the best possible way. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. And it doesn't seem at all like you're on a victory lap. You know what I mean? You're still out here putting out new music. You've got a bunch of different projects. I mean, you've always had a few different aliases.
Yeah.
Is there anything you're focused on right now? Like, what are you excited about, or what's really fun for you, right now that you're working on?
Well, I mean, like doing my E-Dance Alive is really fun. Because it's a combination of visuals and bringing the studio on stage. It's my deeper techno project. So, it's a journey when you see the show, and it kind of evolves throughout the show. And it's interesting to see the reaction of people because they don't necessarily know the music, because the first album, E-Dance album, came out in, 98.
Sure.
Somewhere right around there. Now we're here 20 years later, and I'm performing this live in certain places. I just did Denver. I did New York. Somebody just said, bring it to L.A., So that's cool. And then the fact that Inner City has been recreated, and my son is actually one of the partners in it now. So he's doing amazing. A lot of the music.
He's a producer as well?
Yeah, my son Dantes and Damari both are DJing and making music. They play in different places. They play at Movement every year, too, as the Saunderson brothers. So that's exciting when you see your kids join in and organically with a passion that I grew up loving and creating, and now that they are also following that path.
Yeah.
So it's inspirational and it's exciting to see that too.
Did they push you forward with what they're doing?
They actually they were working with their own friends. They were moved out and come back telling me, Dad, I'm a DJ. I'm working on music. And then when I realized that they were serious, because one of them moved back home and he was just always in my studio, like that. Just the beats wouldn't stop.
Yeah.
Then I realized, you're serious. I kind of took them both around the world, let them kind of see everything, different places, Ibiza, Holland, London, see the different scenes. So, they're, like I say, they're developing their own careers, and then one of them I'm doing Inner City with. So he's doing we're working on a new record with different singer, and looking forward to that too.
I mean, that's kind of amazing because to me, that seems like the perfect mix of new and old, where you can revisit and celebrate, your legacy and things you've done in the past, but it's with a new generation, right?
That's what the goal is, and it's organically that way because the age difference between me and my son, and actually the new singer, she's younger too. So
yeah. Do you find when you go out and do these shows, do people, what's the mix between people who are there because they knew the music at the time and they want to revisit it versus the people who are just finding out about it?
I would say it's still about 90% the new people.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's definitely 90%. It's going to be interesting when we tour this summer with Inner City to see how, especially in Europe, if it's going to be similar, or if it's going to be more of a mix. And I think it depends on the type of events, because I'm doing some events for Hacienda, and Hacienda has this legacy from, that famous club back in the day. If they draw, an older crowd, or how that's going to work. But
it's an interesting question to think about, when music started taking you around the world. What did you learn, and how did that affect the music you were making? When you first started going to places like Ibiza, to places Europe, Asia, anywhere.
Well, I think when I started traveling, it was just inspirational, more or less, and you want to get back in the studio to make another track because you see how people were embracing Detroit music, or our music, or house music, or just the music of the future. That was great to see that. And then at one point you seen this. One way I know that music had an impact or influenced me in some kind of way from Europe is when the breakbeat scene came in. I used to do some funky breaks and beats. So I used to every now and then sample some of those loops, chop them up, and really try to reuse them or recreate them in some of my tracks. Not a lot of them, but still about 5 tracks I use breaks in. So, that re-inspired me in a different way.
I mean, it's just so crazy. Like, is it possible to sort of comprehend at this point? I mean, you, along with Derrick and Juan, you're the fathers of techno music, something that is now just synonymous with this global movement, right? Not to mention some other undersung things, like I wanted to at least mention the Reese bass line, which I don't know if everybody knows. I mean, that was you who created the Reese bass.
Yeah. I mean, many people don't know. But I created this sound that was from one of my tracks. The artist was Reese. That's my middle name, Maurice, Reese. Anyway, so I created this sound, this bass sound that became like a big sample from the drum and bass DJs.
Yeah.
It was in every drum and bass record.
And still to this day, I mean, I hear it all over.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what, too, part of my creating was always trying to create a unique sound that was different, I was able to achieve that a few different ways.
Is that something, like, what does that mean to you? I just can't even imagine being responsible for something that had, such a butterfly effect of, like, this one little sound you made changes the course of dance music for decades,
Just means God's blessing at my path. That's simple as that. And I was designed to do it. And, it was my talent.
I mean, that's just incredible. With the Reese bass sound, or with just Detroit techno in general, there was no blueprint for anything you were doing, right? And you were all just kind of interested in the future, right? Interested in making something new, progressing, putting your point of view out there. Do you think that drive and that energy came from the three of you being, somewhat isolated at first, like meeting up in a small town at first and having that experience and sort of feeling like it was, you against the world, to use a cliche phrase? Like, where does that drive come from?
I think my drive come from sports and just being competitive.
Yeah.
And the technology just hit at the right time with the right people.
Fair enough.
That's what I think.
Well, what about even something like the idea of a remix, which is another thing that you guys sort of pioneered, right?
Yeah. I was the first person to take a record and get rid of everything and just put it. I kind of made my record and used a piece of the vocal or some of the vocals over a track that I created.
Because before that, I mean, just for the people who don't know, what did a remix mean before that?
So before then, a remix was a re-edit of the original part. So you might hear this radio record that was big on radio. So they bring Jelly Bean Benitez and or Chet Pettibone, people who were the top remixes back then. They would re-edit it, restructure it. So maybe now the intro is a lot longer before the vocal comes in. It was really designed to more or less so people like Larry Levan and the disco guys could play this record because it was too short. It was right to the point where it gave it space and all that and added some effects. That was really it. Where when I did my remix, which was the first of its kind, the record company didn't know what to think. It was like, where's the song? This is a new record, but we hear our vocals over it. So,
and were you remixing, bands at the start?
I remixed We Papa Girl rappers. Then I remixed New Order. I remixed Yellow. I remixed some of everybody because at that time it became, everybody wanted this remix done. And then other people started remixing the same way, and it became a formula today as we know it. The formula for remixing.
That's so incredible to think about. You must have, I can only imagine those early conversations of you sending that in.
Yeah.
What even gave you the confidence to do that?
Well, I didn't like what I heard.
Okay.
And back then it wasn't like you say, well, do you want to do a remix on this? You just said yes on everything just because it was the beginning.
Yeah.
Everything was inspiring. And you just stayed in the studio. If you need to stay there 48 hours or 3 days to get it how you wanted it, then you find a way to get it done. And to me, actually, it was easier to do it that way than to try to make what was on tape work.
You're right. Yeah, that's the old saying of you can't shine shit or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's interesting to think about the technology back then too versus now, right? Like what did producing a track or a remix even look like back in the day, like when you were first starting? Because there wasn't even a computer involved at that point, right?
Well, it was early generations, some 128s on some computers and some programs back then, but you still had these big studios with big, massive boards. It was multi track tapes, 24, 48, depending on. Sometimes each track had a different sound on it. It might have, a clap, a kick, a bass, depending on the producer or the track you were remixing. I used to hate to get the ones with 48 tracks where they had to bring two of them together. That was just ridiculous. Because, most of it you wouldn't use, but you had to go through it all just to cipher through it. You didn't really have samples back then. I mean, in the very beginning, you didn't. It started evolving, so, you had to rely on the parts that you did use, or if you wanted to use something from that, you would have to sync it with the sequencer. Now with the tape,
right?
It was not.
This is pre-MIDI, right?
Oh yeah. Well, no, it was still MIDI, but it was still sync because you wasn't like today. You can do a remix and grab stems from a track or the parts and put it in Ableton and chop it up perfectly, still on beat, and then you can start working. Well, back then you couldn't do that, so the process was a lot longer. Trying to. And if you did like something you heard, or let's say the vocals, let's say I wanted to use the vocals, and the tape sync wasn't working right with the sequencer, that's a big problem because you can't get it to lock up right. You can spend 10 hours trying to fix that sometime. And that was difficult times. I had some times like that.
Yeah.
And sometimes you had some great creations like that too, because sometimes it takes you in a different path.
Yeah, I always think putting limitations on creativity can be helpful sometimes. Yeah. But at the same time, I'm sure you're happy to not have to spend those 10 hours anymore.
Yeah.
And I think you've been pretty good about, it seems like you're always looking at new technology, right?
Yeah.
And incorporating all of that.
Definitely.
Is there anything else we haven't covered? What should people be looking out for? What are you working on right now? Obviously, we mentioned the tour is coming up.
Yeah, just a tour. My label, we're still releasing music. And
it's going on, 30, 35 years?
It's probably 35 years with my labal.
That's
it's 30 years within the city. So, okay, 33, 34, somewhere right around.
Man.
So we still releasing tracks. And just, keep moving forward and look out for the Saunderson brothers as well. They're doing it.
Final thought, dance music has blown up so much in the States now, and it's kind of at this crazy level that it has not been up until this point. Where do you see yourself fitting into it all? Do you feel like you're a part of, the movement that's happening right now? Do you feel like you're sort of a torchbearer for the roots of it? How do you see yourself fitting in, and what have you thought of, this recent explosion?
Yeah, I see myself fitting in. I can still play with the best of them. I mean, but generations change and their tastes change too. Just because I play what I think is a great track, they might not understand it or get it. But I'm forward thinking, and everybody is not forward thinking no matter what. So and that's part of my success. But I'm also, I'm still this pioneer. I'm still this person that looks into the future. I'm just born that way, but still my main goal is to make you dance, make your ass dance on the floor. And that's what the music that I bring to the table, whether I'm making it or playing it, that's the most important aspect of all of this for me.
Amen. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Final question. I ask this at the end of each interview. Off the top of your head, you don't need to think about it too much. A moment in your life when just in a moment, music really deeply affected you. And that could be, change the way you thought about something. It could be tied to an important memory. It could just be a song you heard that, gave you goosebumps one time. Kind of just the first thing that pops into your head.
Yeah, Paradise Garage, Larry Levan, experience when I first went, got there at 1 a.m, left at 12 midday, walking out, so inspired. The music was amazing, and then walking out into the sunlight, was like just blinding and just an unbelievable experience.
Yeah, I can only imagine the energy in that room and the fact that it must have felt like you just found a secret that nobody else knew about, right?
Definitely.
Man, incredible. Well, thank you so much, man. This has been a real treat.
Thank you.
All right, peace.
Bye.
All right, that's the show. Shout out to Kevin Saunderson. That was a true honor to speak to you, man. I enjoyed that really on a whole nother level. For everybody out there listening, I hope you enjoyed that as well. Don't forget, Kevin Saunderson is taking Inner City on tour. Do not miss your chance to hear these legendary songs live. The link to all those dates is in the description of this episode. My name is Willy Joy. You can always hit me up, backtobackpod@gmail.com or at Willy Joy or at backtobackpod on all social media. I got to run out of here. I'm actually on my way to go meet up with a future guest of this show, somebody in a totally different genre from Kevin Saunderson, who has definitely been influenced and used the sounds that Kevin made back in the day. So this is a fun connection, full circle moment. I got to run. I hope you have a great week. Take care of yourselves. Take care of the people around you. And I will talk to you next Tuesday. For Back to Back, this is Willy Joy. Peace.